All right, friends, as we continue our update here, we are moving on to the cowling at this time. Let's talk about what we have going on here. So a couple things. First of all, you can see I put in 2 wood blocks. Now, the plans show that there's supposed to be 3 screws going down. By the way, we're looking at the top cowling here, bottom cowling down here. The screws are supposed to go down, 3 of them, in this section right in here, this curved section. However, when you look at the cowling, you can clearly see there's no way that that's going to be possible. Now, perhaps I should have left a little extra plastic on here. Perhaps maybe that would have made it work a little bit better. But anyway, whatever the case may be, I can only do 2. But that's more than enough. That's going to hold it in place. So what we're doing is we're letting that dry, and then we'll get that on the cowling. I'll get that on the plane, get all the holes drilled. Now, one of the things that we're definitely going to be doing, the problems with these ABS cowls is that they are flexible to a point, but when they break, they really break. So that was always one of the major issues. Nowadays, most cowlings and most airplanes are fiberglass. So what's going to happen is once we get it mounted, get all the holes drilled, then I'll go back and I'm going to lay a single layer of 3/4 ounce light fiberglass all on the inside of the cowling to help keep its strength. So anyway, that's what we're going to do. You can see our bottom half here with the 2 blocks. That's just probably like 1/8 inch ply is all we're doing. And it's cut, each of those blocks are about 1/2 inch. Okay, that I cut. And that's all you're really going to need. What we'll do is we'll wind up putting blocks inside the fuselage because the way that the cowling attaches, let me show you the bottom half. It goes on like this. As you can see, it slides right on. That's the bottom half right there. And you can see it from above as to how it looks. So it's a split cowl, which isn't so bad because if you have to get it there at the plane, you can just remove just the top cowling. But it'll make more sense as we go along. Anyway, so we're gonna let that dry, and then we're gonna go ahead and work on mounting the cowling. Now, one of the issues is cooling, by the way. Let's talk about that. You can see there's already a cooling slot that's been cut into it, that was molded into the actual cowling, and that's because you have a two-stroke engine. It would be sitting this way normally, the head of the two-stroke. So the air coming in would go over the cooling fins of the two-stroke and then come out this way. However, that's not the case. So the issue is we have to get cooling to the actual ESC. Now, let's take a look at that quarter scale long easy that I built not that long ago. And you can see it has a scoop on the bottom there. You can see it right there. And if you look down in the cowling there, you can see there's the ESC right there. And it's in a direct path of the air coming in. So it's able to cool the ESC and provide adequate cooling to the motor as well. So we may need to make some kind of scoop on the bottom, but I think what I'll do is I'll first get the cowling mounted and attached, and then we can start looking at some type of scoop, because the other issue is where we're going to mount, where is the location of the ESC itself. So with those things in mind, we'll go ahead and we will get the cowling mounted and move on from there. More to come. All right, friends, as we continue our update regarding mounting of the cowling, you can see we've got the long easy upside down. Let's talk about some things to keep in mind. First of all, let's talk about the rounded sides of the fuselage. Now, the way you can tell that you've properly rounded the sides of the fuselage is by the fit of the cowling. If the fuselage sides have not been rounded correctly, you're going to get sort of a puffing out, if you will, of the sides here, which we're not having. You can see it's nice and flush on both sides, which is real nice. The top, there's a slight puffing. I'm not too concerned about that. It's very small, very minor, nothing major whatsoever. Now, the other parameter to keep in mind to see if you've positioned the cowl correctly is look at the corner right here. That corner, as we see, should line up with the trailing edge on both sides. That's how you know it's aligned correctly. And you can see for the most part, it's aligned correctly here. Now, the other reason, or something else to keep in mind, is per the instructions, we really should be mounting the motor first, and we are. The key thing, though, is that since we're doing electric, and of course, if you were doing nitro or gas or whatever, you do the same thing, you need to measure the distance from the back of the firewall to the lip of the cowling. That way we know how long the standoffs need to be so that the motor, whatever you're using, the back of the plate of the motor is able to clear the actual cowling itself. So before we start drilling any holes, we're going to do a measurement, and then we'll go ahead and then we'll mount the motor and work from there. All right, more to come. Hi friends, welcome to the Plain Fun RC channel as we continue our update with regards to the installation of the cowl. Let me show you what we did here. We took our ruler and we placed it on the back of the firewall, and then you can see how the right angle is up against the edge of the cowling. That's how we're able to determine our distance. Now, in order to determine how long the standoffs need to be, we're going to take our motor, like so, and we're going to go through and place the, here we go, yes, that works best. Place the ruler like so, and if you look carefully, let me rotate this a little bit, look at the back plate, and you'll see the distance from the back plate to the end of the ruler, and it winds up being roughly about, roughly about 40 millimeters. Turn this a little bit more. There we go. Roughly about 40 millimeters is what we're shooting for. Okay, to get the proper distance from the back of the back of the motor, from the firewall to the edge of the cowling, so that the propeller clears the edge of the cowling. So we're going to add a 40 millimeter standoffs. All right, folks, more to come. All right, friends, as we continue our update, we've got our standoffs in place. I'm going to show you what it looks like in just a second. One thing I want to mention, I know I said 40 millimeters, 40 millimeter standoffs, which was fine. It did bring the back plate there away from the edge of the cowling. However, I didn't anticipate the pitch of the prop. If you're using a prop like an APC, for example, this prop here, you can see the pitch. The blade itself just slightly extends past this portion of the propeller, so therefore it was actually rubbing against the cowling. So I had to take it and add this one little additional spacer here, and you'll see it in a second how we have it set up. But anyway, so the standoffs are in place. It looks great. What I did for standoffs, by the way, you can pick these up from, I got them from Ace Hardware. I'm sure you can find them online somewhere. There aren't many manufacturers that really make spacers for 440 or 632nd, sorry, 632nd screws, but nonetheless, you kind of have to either make up your own or just go and get these spacers from your local hardware store. They are threaded, by the way. Anyway, let me show you what it looks like. Let me take this propeller off. This is not the propeller we're going to use. I just wanted to see how it looked. All right, let's lift this top cowling up, and you can see how we did the spacers here. Now, these washers here are very important. Okay, they help to give slightly some additional spacing and additional stability for the motor. That's why it's so important. Make sure they're called plumber's washers, if I remember correctly. Forgive me. Anyway, but you can see the spacers here, okay, that we have. All right. Now, what I can tell you is this. You're probably asking, well, how long are the spacers? Here's what I can say to you. You kind of just have to sort of figure it out when you're working with it. Your plane might be slightly different in terms of spacing, but I'll give you the measurements, of course, just so you know. So for the longer spacers that are there, let's see. Whoop, let me flip this over. Here we go. Here's the metric portion of it. Ooh, wrong way. Okay, here we go, everybody. Okay, so those spacers are about, what do they look to be? Roughly about about 15 millimeters, maybe a little bit longer, 16 millimeters. So you've got 2 of those, and you've got the smaller spacers here, and you can see the length on that right there, probably about 6 or 7 millimeters for that. Anyway, so that's pretty much it. Now, we will put lock washers on, or lock nuts on the back. I just wanted to get a temporary fit for right now. But it fits perfectly, and it looks great, and it clears the cowling. Let me put the top cowling on. One of the other things you want to keep in mind is the positioning of the wires coming off the motor. So let me position the cowling as close to its approximate placing where it's going to be. And once again, we're looking at the edges here. There's little corners lining up with the trailing edge. I know I'll have to move this a little bit, but take a look on the inside here. And if you look up at the top, you can see the wires clear, for the most part, the top portion of the cowling up there. Now, they will be pulled down a little further once they're attached to the ESC. So now the biggest issue now, let me take the top cowling off, is where do we put the ESC? So there's not a great deal of room in here. And we're going to be going with this 80 amp Castle Creations. And that's a fairly large ESC, as you can see, in relation to the firewall. So it's probably going to wind up going beneath the motor somewhere. Cooling is going to be an issue as well. We have some space over here on the sides behind the wing, which is a potential spot for where it could possibly go. But the biggest thing is cooling. What I'm thinking is maybe doing something very similar to what we did on the quarter scale over there, where we created a little deck on the bottom and then screwed that ESC in place so it sat like this beneath the motor, and then perhaps going through and on the bottom of the cowling there, maybe opening up a slot or something to that effect, and maybe even creating an air scoop. So definitely a few things to think about as we continue on. And nonetheless, the motor's in place, and we'll have more with regards to placement of the ESC. Hey friends, a quick mention, by the way, we're using 6/32 by 2.5 inch socket heads for mounting the motor. I forgot to mention that. All right, friends, as we continue our update here on installation of the cowling and the motor, we've gone ahead and begun the process of mounting the bottom half of the cowling since the motor is now in place. So pretty straightforward. I'm finding one screw here, one here, one here, one here, and one here is more than sufficient. You really don't need to put anything down here because remember now we've got these 2 wood blocks, and that's going to hold the this portion of the cowling in place with the top. And of course the same is on this side as well. Now, very briefly, let's chat about the ESC. I tried many different configurations, to be honest with you, to try to fit it in the cowling, and I just can't get a good fit. Now, perhaps maybe if I went with one of the other ESCs that they had, it didn't have the sink, the heat sink, I could probably get it to fit. But I do like the heat sink on the Castle Creations ESCs because it does allow them to run cooler, and that's very important. You definitely don't want an ESC that's going to overheat. So the best way to do this is we're just going to wind up putting this right there on the outside. Kind of takes away from the scale details, but it works. I think what we're going to wind up doing is actually turning it like this, because then I can take these leads here and pass them through the cooling vent, and that will allow me to go ahead and hook up the motor directly. The other option, of course, is just to put it this way, and then make a little incision here in the cowling and pass the leads through, which will work just as well. Either way, that's really what we're going to wind up doing. So we're going to flip this plane over, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to mount the top half of the cowling, and then continue from there. More to come. All right, friends, as we continue our update here, we're about to mount the top cowling. A couple things to keep in mind. Number one, take some time to shape this portion of the wood that the canopy mounted to. You need to do it on both sides because remember now the cowling is going to sit over top of this. So you need this in line with the same shape as the canopy. And you can see how it's definitely not shaped the same when we look at it close up on both sides. So anyway, just take a moment to do that. And then you can go ahead and begin the process of mounting the cowling. All right, more to come. All right, friends, as we continue our update, you can see the top portion of the cowling is in place, and it just looks fantastic. You can see it from above, and we'll give you a couple 3/4 as well, so you can see the airplane with the cowling in place. And it's just looking great. What we're going to do with the cowling next is we're going to go ahead and we are going to glass the inside with some light fiberglass. The reason for that is because these ABS plastic cowlings were very popular in the 80s and the 90s. And the biggest issue with ABS plastic on RC aircraft is that it doesn't do well under stress. It tends to crack. And when I mean crack, I mean like really crack. Even though it's flexible, it's not as flexible as fiberglass and not as durable. So you definitely want to make sure if you have an ABS cowling, perhaps from an older kit or even existing kit, definitely take the time to glass the inside of it. So as to protect it. This is a very specialized cowling, so we're definitely not going to be able to pick that up from someplace else. All right, so with that, we're going to do that first, and then after that's done, then we'll go ahead and we will get into doing some covering and some painting, and then the ESC will be the last thing that gets installed. So, all right, more to come. Hi, friends. As we continue our update here on the cowling installation, we have taken the cowling off. We're going to focus on fiberglassing. Now, I know initially I said I was going to do the inside as it says in the instructions, but you know, the problem is that there's a tremendous number of compound curves, and getting this to lay properly is going to be rather difficult. So I think the best way to go about doing this is we're going to try something a little different that I've never done before, and that is we're going to do the exterior. The fiberglass should lay a little easier on both these halves. Now, we'll tell you what I did is I took some 400 grit sandpaper. You just need some fine sandpaper. Went ahead and sanded the outside, just enough to roughen it up. And then I also did sand the inside as well. So when it comes time to paint, then the inside will already be roughened up. So, because I definitely want to paint the inside since it's so visible through the exterior, through the rear portion of the aircraft. We're going to use 3/4 ounce fiberglass. We're going to use some 30-minute epoxy. We're also going to use the same technique that we used on the wing, where we used some spray adhesive on the exterior to help go ahead and lay and position the fiberglass. And we're just going to do one coat. That should do the trick, one coat of the fiberglass. So we'll see how things come out. More to come. Hi, friends. As we continue our update here with regards to the cowling installation, let's talk about what we have here. So we have our fiberglass in place. Once again, as I mentioned before, we use the same technique, which was the spray adhesive, then putting down your fiberglass and positioning it correctly. And once it's positioned, then we went ahead and I used the Loctite E120 HP. That's their 2-hour epoxy. I decided to go ahead and go with this because this is an aerospace grade epoxy that's actually used to make full-size nose cones on aircraft. What I did differently this time is I did not add a little alcohol to thin out the epoxy at all. I just went ahead and went with the full strength because it's thin enough to where you can actually spread it on. And I'm just kind of curious to see, once it's fully cured, if this prevents the epoxy from becoming tacky and sticky. And in addition, I'm hoping it'll possibly increase the strength of the epoxy as well. Not that it isn't strong enough once it is cured, even with the alcohol. So that's where we are at this time. We're going to let this sit for a full 24 hours, and then we'll go ahead and we'll trim off the excess and move on from there. All right, folks, more to come. Hi, friends. As we continue our update with regards to the cowlings, they are done and dried. Not one of my better jobs. One of the biggest issues is because of the compound curves. It's very difficult to get off the excess. So we're left with quite a bit of excess in certain areas, particularly, for example, right there at the inlet and other areas where there's some pretty difficult compound curves to scrape cleanly. I will say, though, that the 120, the 2-hour epoxy, did work out without the alcohol, did work out really well. It's still a little tacky, you know, but most of this epoxy is after it fully cures. It appears as though it did make the fiberglass a little stronger since I didn't use the alcohol mixed in. I don't think it's really that much of a difference, to be honest with you. I think in hindsight, I would definitely use the alcohol to thin it out a little bit, and then we wouldn't get quite as thick of a layer on some of these areas here, which there's a big disadvantage when you leave thick amounts of epoxy on the fiberglass, it actually becomes brittle, believe it or not. So you want to scrape off as much as you can. Anyway, we're going to trim it, trim off the excess and do some sanding to try to trim off the excess fiberglass, excuse me, do some sanding to get rid of the extra epoxy that's there and make it look a little bit better. And then from there, we'll move on to getting it painted. So more to come. All right, friends, as we continue our update here, let me tell you what we have going on. So we have our cowling sanded. I was able to go ahead and also trim off the excess around it as well. It came out pretty good. I was able to take some of those raised spots in the excess epoxy and smooth it out a little bit. Still have some raised spots. I think once we go ahead and spray the canopy, preferably with 2 coats of primer, that should work well. I've got a friend of mine who's involved in painting automotive, and he says sometimes if you hit a surface 2 times with primer, it takes care of pinholes and helps to sort of smooth out some of the raised surfaces. So we'll see what happens there. Anyway, we also have our canopy here. You can see how I've sanded the outside. Now you'll notice I have it taped on the outside and on the inside as well. And the reason for that is typically when you have a Lexan canopy like this, you would spray paint the inside. But we can't just spray paint the inside because we have these 1/16 balsa strips you can see here. So therefore, we have to paint both sides. So that way we go ahead and we get a nice finish on the outside as well. We won't see the balsa. Now, don't forget to roughen up the outside and the inside, in this case of the canopy. Of course, if you're just painting the inside, then you would only roughen up the inside of the canopy, never the outside, okay? So very important to keep that in mind. Now, let's move over here to our wing. We also have the Lexan portion here of the canopy that we attached. That has been roughened up as well. Roughen up the outside and the inside. And on all of these, don't forget to go through and get rid of the dust. Now, with your canopy, with your cowlings, you can take it and run it through water, and that'll get rid of any of the dust that accumulated from sanding. And, of course, you could do the same thing here, but I would recommend just a simple, slightly damp wet washcloth will do fine on here and here, because we don't want to loosen up the tape on this. Now, one other thing I want you to keep in mind, you have to remember we added these strips of wood here and here to support the canopy. We also added the piece up here to help finish the wing off when it's attached to the fuselage. So it's important to seal that. And I used a little thin CA and a brush, and just kind of very lightly brushed a very, very thin coat on all of these surfaces, these exposed woods, even this part here. This back portion, this balsa portion, and on the inside of that balsa portion as well. Because the problem is when you spray paint balsa and you don't prep it properly, meaning either epoxy it or either fiberglass it or some type of sealant, which CA is a good sealant, over time, it will literally crack, and I've seen that happen firsthand. Now, one other thing that I did too, and I realized that I drilled the wrong spot. I should never have drilled into this piece of balsa to mount the cowling. I should have put blocks here, so we've added some blocks, and I'll re-drill the holes for the cowling just for this part once the plane is fully painted and is fully assembled. So right now, we're just waiting on paint. As soon as the paint arrives, then we're going to go ahead and we'll keep on keeping on. And we're going to do a separate video altogether for painting the cowling, the canopy, and the wing. So, more to come.